Hi, I'm Karcy.
I'm Derek.
And I'm Sam.
And this is Unpacking Homelessness, the podcast where we take a deep dive into the issues surrounding homelessness in our communities. Let's get into it.
Good morning.
Good morning. How you doing?
Good. How are you?
We're good. We're excited to talk to you today.
Yeah.
Yeah. How's the weather in Washington? Is it nice today?
It's all right.
Yeah.
Oh, it's pretty gray.
Here it was too this morning. It was so it's been that way the last couple of days. It's just been like gray and gross. And every now and then the sun peeks out and you're like, okay, spring's coming. And then it's not.
I actually really enjoy it now when it's gray and overcast here in Colorado because it reminds me of home. And I'm like yesterday,
and it's not an everyday thing.
Washington Day.
Yeah.
No, it's not an everyday thing. It's actually special when it happens.
Well, Letha, thank you so much for taking the time to talk to us today. We're really excited to get into some of the things that you've seen throughout your incredible career. Letha Fernandez is a mental health professional, licensed mental health counselor, and substance use disorder professional working and living in Washington State. Thank you for being on today.
Thank you so much for having me. How exciting.
So let's just start with the idea that the homelessness issue is not coming from one place. It's a systemic issue. Can you speak to that a little bit?
It's a huge issue. There's a couple of aspects. I mean, it's not getting enough attention, and it gets a lot of attention. The attention that it gets doesn't help us make the changes that we need to make as communities in order to make sure the most vulnerable among us are cared for. So not enough attention, lots of attention. What are we going to do? So thank goodness you're, putting light to this. Hopefully we can bring more people to the table that are able to bring their perspectives on what do we need to consider in order to address this, because this affects the whole community. Not just a select few or certain populations, this is something that could happen to any of us.
So substance abuse is the most regular one talked about, I feel like. There's a lot of other reasons why people could be homeless. What's your take on some of the areas that aren't getting enough attention?
I think there's a whole lot of things that could go wrong in people's lives. I think that a lot of individuals and households live paycheck to paycheck. So when we think about, what causes homelessness, there's a myriad of things. That's the thing that stands out to me most, because we went through a pandemic. There was a freeze, that people could not be evicted. And probably a little easier for larger apartment complexes, but for people that may own a home themselves that have rented it out, or a condo or that sort of thing, do those people also lose their homes if they go 3 months, 6 months, a year? How long did this go on where people were not required to pay rent? And then not only do people lose their home, but the homeowner or the apartment or condo owner then loses their home and this. But you bring about a good point. Substance use disorders is getting a lot of attention, but it's the most seen aspect, I think, of homelessness is substance use disorder and mental illness. So I think that, a lot of times these things go together. Certainly trauma is a big piece of this. And how do we look after our basic needs in a way that helps promote good mental health, lasting connections, good physical health, good spiritual health? How do we look after these things when we don't have a place to be?
Yeah. And the substance use disorder piece is it's a cycle. People who have been in trauma or have been traumatized, I would imagine, tend to use more frequently than people who haven't. And if you're on the street and you don't have you're not getting endorphins from other places, you're not getting fulfillment from other places. Substance use is a way to get that. That's a quick way to sort of check out from what's going on in the moment, right? And to self-soothe in a way that feels immediate, you know?
I mean, this is a coping skill. It's not sustainable. It's not good for us. It takes care, how am I going to plan for saving for a deposit to get somewhere if I don't know where I will be tonight? I don't know that it will be safe for me to lay my head down without anybody stealing my things and without the police coming through and whisking everybody away, and then we start to overload some of our other systems that aren't great. Shelters fill. We have people that may have backgrounds that make them ineligible to use a shelter. We have people with beloved pets. The shelter may not accept them. I want to be with my partner. It may be a gender-based shelter. I've got children. The children's shelter is filled. It's just me looking after. I mean, there's a whole lot of other things that sort of go into, when you start to peel back the layers, there's a whole lot of other things. And we've certainly seen a surge in methamphetamine, and we've seen a surge in fentanyl, and a lot of people not realizing that they're getting fentanyl, which is a whole other issue and societal problem. But when we look at folks that use stimulants such as fentanyl, then we can stay up all night long and make sure that we've got our stuff with us. We are numbing our senses and not having to feel the pain, not having to relive the trauma. I can't, we are so blessed, and I could not imagine going day to day worrying about, if we're taking methamphetamine, we're not so interested in food, right? We don't have to meet that need. We may become dehydrated. We may start to suffer from vitamin deficiency. Certainly, this is hard on our body, hard on our internal organs, really hard on our brain. We're making decisions that we would not have normally made. We may be having associates or friends or individuals that we would not normally associate with for lots of different reasons. And then we get into all sorts of other complex issues that, we've got people that are trafficked, we've got crime rates. We know that it can cause psychosis in people. So we've got people that have behavior that they would not normally display. And then, as a community, being challenged by individuals who are not doing well. And clearly, if they could do better, they would. And here we are. And how do we make space for individuals that aren't doing well? How do we make space for people that may or may not have any substantial means of income? I mean, there are wonderful resources available in Seattle. There are resources available where you could go and get a shower if you needed it, where you could go and wash your clothes. And all of these things come with rules. As a society, we have rules that we need to follow hopefully in order to get along with each other, or at least tolerate each other. And
what are some of those rules, Letha, and to be able to for the clothes washing and the showers? What are some of those rules you're talking about?
Ooh, that's a good question. I have not utilized those services myself, so I couldn't speak to personal experience. But as society, we have rules that you can't take things that don't belong to you, right? We cannot be going into public places using racial slurs and threatening people, and I'm going to blow you up. By and large, we probably shouldn't have weapons on us. Does this protect us in our day-to-day life if we are unhoused? Probably. We are also going to a place where we're going to take all our clothes off. right? And be very vulnerable in a public area. And so there, we can't be messing with other people who are doing these I mean, we have societal rules that we have to follow. So great question about the rules. I don't know what the rules might be to individual locations that offers this service, but certainly we have laws. And then we have people that need to enforce these laws, and they may not be readily available when they need to be enforced. And so we get into all sorts of other complex layers of, how do we manage this?
Pretty
It seems,
nuanced, huh?
yeah, it seems
A little
very
bit.
complex, and it seems what we're learning having these conversations is there's such a variety of homelessness of the
Mhm.
people who fall victim to being
Mhm.
unhoused. Some are visible and some are not. It feels like a lot of the things that we're describing right now are the more visible ones that maybe
Mhm.
people see in public. And it can be kind of a misconception of people saying we need to fix the homeless crisis. It needs
Mhm.
to be fixed. And this is actually an issue that's not going to get fixed.
Mhm.
It's something that needs to be managed. In your line of work, what services are you seeing that are working to manage these
Mhm.
issues?
Yeah, and clearly we are not managing this well. I think, we need to support individuals' autonomy and their right to make their own decisions. And sometimes these things don't align with living together as a community. So, if we're looking at building systems and addressing the needs of everyone, and certainly we have people that don't have opportunities. And just circling back to, and I apologize if I'm taking a left turn, circling back to, the idea of being able to become housed, right? Certainly there are agencies that have housing, and that this may be an opportunity for people to sort of get themselves together, treat any medical issues they may have, treat any mental health issues they may have, treat any substance use disorder issues that they may have, maybe foster connection with the community. And some people are not interested in this because, again, they do come with rules that may be against their values and morals and this idea of freedom. But I certainly have worked with individuals who have been chronically homeless, and that this was, in their words, not mine, a choice that they made because they want to be free to live their life the way they want to live it. And when we have, people that struggle with some of these maybe interpersonal conflicts, maybe society conflicts, we've got a dominant society way of looking at things. And should people have to acclimate themselves to this when it does not take into consideration other populations, other viewpoints, other values? And we're all sort of, there's a whole lot of people and there isn't as much space now as there was. And so when we live in close proximity of each other, including on the streets, we see people in tents and we see people in these areas, and there tends to be more people now there. They're having to figure out and struggle with, how do we even get along with the people who have the tent next to us, or who are on the ground outside of the tent next to us. So, as we're trying to figure out, how do we house people, how do we do this in a way that's meaningful for them, and in a way where we can grow together as a community. And there are systemic barriers to this also. The Section 8 housing list is a couple of years long. You got to get your application in if you're a little disorganized, and we've got to be able to get the application in on time. Hopefully, we're able to keep our phone on in order to receive a call. Hopefully, we have access to an email address. If that's, I'm unfamiliar with the process these days. This is a rather historic viewpoint. I apologize, but probably email. If we've got it, do we need a mailing address? And do we need to consistently pick up our mail and be available to pick up our mail so we can be notified that we're getting closer, right? In
So
the
you,
interim, are
so
we
you kind
doing
of have
any?
to remain on call 2 years down the road. You don't know if you're going to get that call. You may not have availability to an email. Yeah,
At
that's
least
a
2 years.
So you
wow.
need to have some sort of semblance of stability in order to get to a place where you can achieve
Yeah.
stability. That's
Yeah.
challenging.
How
Yeah, what would you do if
discouraging.
you lost? What would you do if you lost your cell phone? What would we do if we lost our cell phone?
Right.
What would somebody who does not have resources do if they lost their cell phone?
Yeah.
And we've got to charge them too, right? I mean, so that's another issue. But if you know, if we're there are things that will disqualify you from receiving Section 8, right? What does your credit history look like? Section 8 wants to know that that you have the financial means. Do you have a job? You know, it, employment also a barrier. How do we apply for a job if we've got just the two sets of clothes? We might be able to get to a place where we could shower a couple of times a week. How well are we going to be received, especially in the hot summer months, if we have so limited resources that we're not able to present ourselves well so that we can be readily accepted by the person sitting next to us on the bus? Maybe we're malodorous. How likely are we to get hired? When we have people that have violent offenses, domestic violence, sex offenders, how do these people become housed? And if we've got them on the streets and, you know, moving from place to place with no address, with no stable arrangement, then how do they meet their needs? I'm not sure what I'm so fortunate. These have not been things that I personally have had to live through. Certainly, I've helped clients in various aspects of these things. And, you know, in social services, when they move on and do better, or we don't hear from them, we don't see what it looks like from beginning to end.
Let me ask you this, Letha. So other countries adopt the housing first mindset of
Mhm.
you can't kind of work on yourself until you have housing first. And I completely understand why you need to have some sort of regulations and code of
Mhm.
conduct and things like that. So
Mhm.
you have a much more vast experience in this field. Do you have any opinions on whether it should be housing first or whether, what sort of order should we take with this sort of thing when somebody's unhoused?
And this is my bias, right? In seeing these things and in watching people struggle. And I've got a specific population that I work with. There are struggles in other populations. Um, what do we need to do to help the person in front of us improve their life, reduce trauma, reduce mental health issues, reduce substance use disorders, promote their ability to meet their basic needs so that they can contribute, so that they can be a good neighbor, so that they can be a good son, a good daughter, a good non-binary individual? How do we do these things? Yeah, so I don't know that, we can look through one lens and say, what housing is a good idea. Let's make the social services available in the housing. We can offer it. We're not going to shove it down anybody's throat. We're going to check on people every day to make sure everybody's alive and in the building. There are some rules, again, associated with being a part of these programs. In wet housing, we're not looking at abstinence. We're looking at a harm reduction model. When you look through that lens, this appears to be a good idea. Now, we also know that when people are using substances, they're not making decisions that they would normally make because they are influenced by substances. So, that said, do you want a wet house next door to you? So when we look through that lens, then the question becomes, and we see this with safe injection sites also, by and large, maybe most people would consider that this seems like a good idea. And probably a few more people would think, I don't want it next to me. So then it's good idea, not good idea. Or is this going to be in my neighborhood? Is this not going to be in my neighborhood? If we put this way out somewhere else, if we're looking at resolving some of these things, well, then we need to be on a bus line. right? So people can get to and from the services that they need, to and from probation, to and from jobs, to and from the showers, to and from work, to and from the people's homes that are helping support them, social services, the methadone clinic, wherever it is that we need to get to and from. So, how
Wow, that's making me think too, like the surrounding community, of course, might have concerns about a wet housing opening up. And maybe we should just disclaim too that wet housing, or maybe you should be the one to explain
Can you tell us what wet housing is, Letha?
Yes,
let's define it.
Because it's not what I thought, which initially was a place for people to go to get out of the rain. That was my first guess, and I was wrong. So
I like that idea, though. So it's a harm reduction model. You're not expected to be abstinent. And there are apartment buildings in Seattle. So it isn't just a shelter. You have your apartment, you have some autonomy, you have your own space with you. In some instant, and I'm not familiar with wet housing these days, I don't have any clients in it. But historically, you get up in the morning and it could be the case that they give you your 2 beer to prevent you from going into withdrawal and having seizures and that sort of thing, and that social services are available generally. And I think this is really a wonderful professional opportunity. There are peer support specialists. So folks that have gone through King County, trains peer support specialists for free. They are looking for individuals that maybe have recovered from all sorts of different kinds of things in their life and are willing to be alongside folks who are struggling with some of the things that they have gone through in the past and have used these resources and may know how to access them better and can help guide folks through the process. So, when we look at professional services, these are generally people that, went to school, studied some stuff, may become certified, may become licensed, and it's sort of a one-way relationship where I'm here to provide a service to you. This is about you. This is about what you need. This is about what your values and beliefs are. I'm not sharing, well, I hope professionals aren't sharing their own personal values and beliefs onto their clients. I'm not relating stories of my family to clients. I'm not relating what my home life looks to. This is, when we work with professionals, it's all about them, right? When we work with peers, they are able to share these stories of what they've experienced, what they've come through, what was helpful, what was not helpful, which agencies may provide services that will speak to their unique needs, whatever those may be, and help them navigate the world in a different way. But these, we are starting to recognize more and more the need for, and we certainly have, peer specialists that have been unhoused and can help with some of these things and can be a part of outreaching this community when folks are ready to say, I just can't do this anymore. I need to make a change.
Yeah, it seems as though, so we only have so much budget, right, to go to certain social services. And I think the idea of some of our maybe taxpayer dollars going towards wet housing can initially be very controversial for people. Mm-hmm. We know that one just opened. Actually, you informed us that one had just opened somewhat recently in downtown Seattle, and it is controversial. People don't necessarily want to live next door to, a wet housing apartment complex, not a shelter. And so I think it's very important to shine a light on that. It's not just somewhere where people can live and do drugs. It's somewhere where people can live and get resources to navigate through their drug use, to get help and assistance navigating through that drug use and hopefully getting to a place of weaning off of it and maybe graduating out of the wet housing.
To be clear, they can do drugs there. We want, folks have substance use disorders. And, when we look at wet housing, they have the dignity. This is a disorder. This is an illness. This is something that by and large, some people don't recover from, but they have the dignity to have some space to be, do we necessarily want people to live their lives this way? It seems like it's a great deal of suffering, and they have the right to choose, right? This is the coping mechanism. They can't imagine not doing this. Some people get sick and tired of being sick and tired and accept services that the expectation is not that they will become sober, but this will allow some dignity and have some basic needs met. Probably more likely to not go out and steal and not go out and commit offenses if we've got a place to be with our stuff. I couldn't imagine living my life that way, but I can also see that these are people that are in so much pain that they can't see any other way. And so do we push them out onto the streets and let them rot? I mean, not at all humane. This doesn't account for their trauma history, their mental health history. If these are people that are impacted cognitively and don't have the support to do better or choose this for themselves. Yeah. And nobody gets into this saying, I want to be I want to have a substance use disorder. And here we are.
Right. So you could say that housing is a way of meeting people where they're at and just trying to keep them off of the street.
Yeah.
And just give them shelter and helping meet some of those basic needs that we all need.
Yeah. One of my colleagues pointed, and depending on how much we see or how much we experience in these populations and cultures, what sort of turned the light on to me was that I had a colleague that said, so-and-so died and they lived in this wet housing unit. And she said, I'm just so thankful that they were able to die with dignity. But this was not somebody that was found under the bridge with no one there. So, and of course, there's lots of different viewpoints on, do we spend dollars on this? When we are well housed, well fed, well educated, supporting ourselves, we are more likely to say, why can't they just stop doing this? Why can't they just get themselves together? Why can't they just go get a job? And I would imagine that most people would want that for themselves. And we have barriers, and they're systemic barriers. And just because somebody wants it today and they said, okay, I can't do this anymore, I've got to go to a withdrawal management facility. I think I can do this. I think I've got the motivation to make a change and maybe not do these things that are harming me. Is there a bed available? And there's no bed available. And the person that I went to go see, well, they were rude to me, or I didn't like the way they looked at me, or whatever else, it was a poor connection in trying to get somebody in the door. And I'm 15 minutes late. Everything's full. I'm going to go into withdrawal soon. I think I'll go and meet this urgent physiological, psychological need that I have. And maybe I'll think about this on another day. Never mind, I can't do it.
So Letha, I'd like to highlight a few of your professional affiliations. So in the mental health space, then ethnic minority mental health specialist, developmental disabilities mental health specialist, child mental health specialist. And so I think to give the listeners some perspective of what sort of information you're working with, can you share any particular stories of people that you've worked with that are in this position?
And my specialty is intellectual and developmental disabilities. So generally speaking, folks with cognitive deficits from a developmental standpoint, because we know that when we use substances over a long period of time, especially substances that are damaging to the body, this affects our prefrontal cortex, which is our ability to organize ourselves, our ability to future plan, our ability to think critically. Certainly when we have used substances for a long period of time, there may be cognitive deficit. So and that's the case. And I work from the developmental end of things, that these are things that have, happened in childhood, that they're, it may be fetal alcohol syndrome, where we've got some brain damage. So that's the population that I've worked with for a long time, and also a very vulnerable population. I'm very fortunate that, the state has the Developmental Disabilities Administration that by and large helps to support individuals with intellectual and developmental disabilities with things like housing. So, I don't know how professionals work with this population without being burned out, without having their heart break every day. There's no place for people to go, all of that stuff. Fortunately, most of our folks are housed and they are vulnerable. And if they get drawn into any of this substance use stuff, they become trafficked. They have the right to make their own decisions. And so they may choose to hang out with the people that are unhoused. And these are then their friends. And then their friends are asking them to, oh, we'll just take this bag down the street over there. Don't worry about what's in it. Take it down there. That guy down there is going to give you X, Y, and Z. Maybe it's money. Maybe it's, a cheeseburger and fries. Maybe it's a pair of shoes, whatever it is. And then we start getting into things like moving drugs around. We certainly have had individuals who have had other people give them substances, whether or not they're aware of it, and then they become trafficked. And then we have a hard time finding them. Then they develop some sort of substance use disorder. Then we're not able to find them. We certainly have had people moved across state lines. How do we address this? So, yeah, certainly I can, and we're always looking for new and innovative interventions, right? Let's try something that we haven't tried before. It's probably been 10 years ago now, maybe longer. We had an individual that fortunately came to see us on a very regular basis. We provided food. He'd come around at least once a day and would get to put eyeballs on him. What can we do to help you out? Have you been to see DOC? Because they've been asking for it, Department of Corrections. They've been asking for you. Whatever the case may be, really had a difficult time housing this gentleman because he couldn't make friends anywhere he went. We had some explosive episodes. We couldn't seem to get anything to stick. And these were maybe a lack of problem solving skills, lack of emotional regulation, lack of learning these things in his upbringing. Didn't have parents that taught him to regulate, didn't demonstrate how to effectively get things in society by using the language that people want to hear. And so we have, an adult now that didn't get those skills, is doing the best that he can, and we can't keep him housed and very remorseful after these things happen. I shouldn't have done that. Probably one of the most amazing individuals I've ever worked with at making a repair. Letha, I'm so sorry. I shouldn't have said that, very able to give heartfelt apologies, and he couldn't help himself in the moment, right? Executive functioning skills. So the intervention then was, let's get him a tent. If we get him a tent, he'll be out of the rain. It's not going to be warm. We'll get him a tent and a sleeping bag. It'll be a small tent so that we don't need to worry about, you're my friends, come on in. Now we're fighting and arguing with each other. And then we've got all these other issues that we weren't trying to have. We have those when we're looking for housing. And it worked for a little while. And then, sometimes we end up trading our things in order to get the substances or gain favors. Maybe we needed, jeans and shoes more than we needed the tent right now. And so we're always looking for creative ways to provide an intervention. And it's hard to tell what's going to be effective and what isn't. We'd like to think that we're not going to stop trying. And we just need it to work for this person. Maybe it'll work for other people. Maybe we can give it a try. But I've got this person in front of me today that is saying, I have no place to go and I don't know what to do. And will you buy me lunch? Is that what you were looking for?
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, we're just taking it all in.
I know. Yeah, my brain goes to like it really goes to show that like the skills that you learn in childhood, right? The self-regulation that you're able to practice safely as a child is
Hmm.
so important and so foundational to the way that you're going to navigate your life.
Hmm.
You know, that's what I was thinking about was, man, I gotta help my kids regulate. Like,
Well, and when we know that we have children that, and this is a little bit of a left turn, we know that we have children that struggle with things like ADHD.
mhm,
Can't sit still, difficult to focus, blurting things out, a little bit of chaos in the classroom, that kind of stuff. These are the children that get punished,
mm,
and they don't have the ability yet. Their brains are different, but these are the bad kids, right? Labeled bad kids, and we're just not teaching the way they need to learn. And how do you do that for one or two children when you've got a classroom of 25 children that you're responsible for, and we've got all sorts of classroom issues? But if we're not getting this early on, and then we see people that are yelling at children. We see them screaming at children and name calling. We're demonstrating that this is how you treat people, and this is your value and worth.
mm.
You know, what do they bring with them into adulthood? And
Oh
if
my
they have
gosh.
children, this is how you raise children, right? If they have children, this is what I know. Wasn't effective, but this is all that I know. And these individuals grow into adults, and now we're adults. I'm an adult. I don't have to do anything that you tell me to do, and they don't until they do, and we find ourselves in the criminal justice system. And you will get up at this time, and then we have no sense of autonomy, and we don't have any sense of personal choice. And what we have seen is that it wasn't really modeled for us how to make personal choice, how to negotiate. We've got parents that say, you're going to do this way. I'm in charge. I just had this conversation with one of the clinicians that I supervise yesterday. I said, I don't know that I would want so and so's parent talking to me. I don't know that I would be in a conversation with somebody talking to me the way I hear them talk to their child. I think that I would be ending the conversation and just saying, when you're able to get yourself together, I'd love to hear what you have to say, but this is, this is hurtful. I just can't listen to this way from you.
Mhm.
And we have children that live in these environments.
It's so sad. If you mix ADHD or, some of these things that we're all susceptible to with
Mhm.
like a low income household upbringing
Mhm.
or an upbringing by parents who are also struggling with their own mental either disorders or just,
Mhm.
fighting their own mental struggles, how easily it would make these children susceptible to homelessness.
Mhm.
Yeah, it's very sad.
Yeah, I mean, children are completely dependent on their parents for everything, right? They would not be alive but for their parents. And what kind of adults are they going to grow into? We have a family where dad suffers from mental illness. They're not from this country. Mom doesn't speak English. Everything has to go through dad. And last May, they were given an eviction notice, right? Children haven't been in school for months. The cause for the eviction was because of all of the stuff coming out of the house into the yard and into the neighborhood. And it was not being cleaned up. And all of these notices have been given to get this stuff cleaned up. And for whatever reason, services were offered, and for whatever reason, they declined. It's hard to tell. Sometimes the cell phone's on, sometimes the cell phone isn't on. We're sending someone out to the home. Sometimes they're there, sometimes they're not there. Sometimes the house is filled with cigarette smoke, all of this stuff everywhere, unclean. And we're hearing about this from the parent calls us 4 days before the sheriff's going to come I don't know how they would put everything out in the street, but to close the property. The water is intermittently on and off. The electricity sometimes is on, sometimes the electricity is off. They've got these children with them. Here are people that are about to be unhoused, and this is the family. And for these children, this is their upbringing. This is their childhood experience. And it's not typical.
And they don't know it's not typical, right? This is just
they
how
don't.
they think it is.
Yeah, I mean, we all know what we grew up with, and we have an idea based on our parents' values and behavior and language. This is what we think is typical, and this is how we see the world. And this is different, and they don't know that it's different. And, our primary concerns are, well, we are certainly concerned for safety. Is there food in the house? We, generally speaking, know what the rules are about eviction. However, as with anything in life, we can read what the rules are, and then we experience what actually occurs. And what actually occurs is based on the decision-making of the person who is there at the time, right? Did the sheriff come out on Friday? No. Did they say they were going to come out on Friday? Yes. And we know that the sheriff didn't come out on Friday because they were still there the following week. There were all of these. I mean, this is since last May, right? We're coming up on a year. And we haven't had contact with them in a while. Years ago, I did an internship with CPS. And it was actually a work study that went through the summertime also. And what we found was, folks that struggled with resources would often take their children camping over the summer because it was warm enough to do that. I don't know if these were paid for campsites, unpaid for campsites. And even when we go camping, we have to get along with our neighbors. There are things that we can and cannot be doing. We're not going to be setting off fireworks at 3 a.m. in the campsite, but not so terribly different in some respects.
Yeah.
And there's showers available if it's a state campsite. We also know that at least, I don't know if this is currently the case, but historically, state campsites, you could have alcohol at your campsite, where other campsites you could not. So, environment, community, how are we getting along with others?
So, Letha, am I correct in saying you teach social work?
I teach in the behavioral health arena.
Okay.
So
a little bit
teaching up and coming professionals, mental health, substance use disorder, that kind of stuff. Really enjoy it. Lots of wonderful people coming into the field. A lot of people, especially when we look at educating individuals that are looking to go into the substance use disorder field, a lot of folks are inspired by their own personal experience in receiving services and want to give back. I think, it may be the case, children, when they first start school, I want to be a teacher. I have such a good experience at school and want to do these things. So a lot of times we're inspired by growing up, had a wonderful counselor. I want to be a counselor. I got to do this work. This is so rewarding. So we're seeing a lot more people come into the field, and I just love working with individuals who are on fire about doing this work. They feel that it's their calling. How can we make this as meaningful an educational experience as possible? And recognizing as students, we don't all come from the same background. We don't all come from privilege. And I was just looking up recently, and I'm just going to use the University of Washington as an example because they are right there in a great big university. I was looking up on their website costs for school right now for a bachelor's degree, right? In order to go into the substance use disorder, you can certainly become a professional with an AA degree. Thank goodness this is, There is a huge deficit of substance use disorder professionals. Probably most people have lived experience in this. Let's get them educated, experience, and out in the field. When we're looking at folks going into counseling or mental health or behavioral services, case management, that kind of thing, we're generally looking at folks that have a bachelor's degree. And right now, the University of Washington resident total cost for a year is $35,000 for 1 year of education at the University of Washington. Now, in that budgeted, and that's for somebody that lives off campus. If you live with parents or relatives, about $23,000. So if you do not have parents or relatives as a resource, and you are figuring this out as an adult, it looks like they budgeted $18,000 for housing and food. A lot of us don't come from families that are paying our tuition for us or our costs of living for us. So when we have people then that are, looking at gaining higher education, and this is what it costs. Do we have a car? Do we have a car payment? How do we get to and from school if we live in a more rural area that's not on the bus line? How do we afford these things? And then do they become unattainable? Or do we put ourselves in debt to get a job that, while it is a professional job, that we are going to have student loans on top of food, housing, transportation. Now we've got student loans on top of all of this. If we pencil this out, is it worth it to get a degree, even though we know that this is our calling, or is it more worth it to get a job in an area that may interest us?
Well, it's such a shame because I mean, we were joking about this, Letha, where you mentioned that you had to save up to be able to become a social worker because you have to have this crazy level of schooling to not get paid what is deserved for the role. So, do you have any more insight on that?
Nobody goes to school in the behavioral health field because they're looking at earning a lot of money. Right? Nobody's going to be wealthy doing this. This is a passion for people. These are people that feel called to help. It's a labor of love. And just to take another little turn here, in this field, we work with folks, whether we realize it or not, that are unhoused, that have food scarcity, that have mental health issues, that have family of origin issues, that have substance use disorder issues. And we hear their stories. We see their struggle. Generally speaking, we're compassionate and empathetic individuals. And on the inside, I don't know how people make it through life this way. And we hear story after story after story and hold space for people that are suffering. As professionals wanting to be in this field as a career, how do we take care of ourselves after, there is compassion fatigue. There is secondary trauma. We see folks that have experienced systemic trauma, have been marginalized, and that have had experiences that we probably could not, because of the lives that we live and being blessed and having resources, couldn't imagine living that way. And then I was thinking about this last night, and then there's no place to go. There's no next meal. There's the stuff that they have with them. Nobody wants to sit next to them on the bus. And then they go out into the world, and I go home and I figure out what I want to fix for dinner. I figure out how I'm going to decompress after all of this. How do we hold space and hear these stories, some of which are absolutely traumatizing? Can't believe that they have been so resilient and lived through these things, whatever the coping skills are to get through it, and then leave the office. And then how do we process these things and not take them home with us so that they affect our families and our loved ones and our ability to navigate life that promotes well-being and gives us the strength and resilience to return the next day to hear of these stories. These things didn't work out. I wasn't able to find a place. We rode the bus all night long. Finally they kicked us off the bus because we'd ridden it too many times, but it was cold outside and we didn't have anywhere else to go. And somebody's trying to take my stuff.
Wow. So you could be
Yeah.
a professional making just enough to pay your bills and feed your family. And
If nothing catastrophic happens.
if nothing catastrophic happens, you can be a professional in this field and get by. And then even with those, which, I'm sure at times feels like limited resources to the professionals. Like I'm sure, vacation is like a very special, like if I save enough and if I can get the time off. So it's almost like choosing this profession can feel, like you said, like somewhat of a sacrifice of this is a labor of love. This is not because I'm not going to get rich doing this. And even with those limited resources, you can, I imagine, still feel a sense of guilt that you have more. You go home and you're making dinner and you're sitting at the table with your family eating dinner and you're thinking about that family you worked with that day who might be riding the bus all night, who might not be eating. And I mean, yeah, what are the benefits offered to social workers? Are there any extra benefits to compensate for some of that?
Well, this is a very rewarding career. I think you hopefully you find your niche and your population that you want to work with. And it's highly rewarding, certainly a calling. Washington State has a wonderful EAP program. It's short-term services available for individuals who are employed in Washington State in order to get some counseling in order to maintain your employment and address your mental health. I think it's 6 to 8 sessions. There's no cost. I think that you can access this twice a year. Please don't quote me, I'm not sure, but I know that it is available at least once a year for individuals. I think that a lot of us are consumers of the services that we provide. I think that most, if not all, of my clinicians have their own therapist. And there's a cost associated with that. So an investment that we're making in ourselves, right?
Can't believe that isn't covered.
Well, and some of us have insurance, and so there's a copay. But even with the copay, if you're seeing someone regularly, there's such a thing as a therapist's therapist, right? I want to go to somebody who's accustomed to working with individuals who work in the field, which is because we see all of this stuff and we need to process the trauma that we experience in holding space for and providing services to individuals that are suffering.
It's so interesting to think about the fact that, like, just like putting it all together, right? The people that are choosing to go out and have these really heart-led, compassionate careers, you know, them being often people, it sounds like, who have had experiences themselves that they've been through. They themselves have been in these situations where maybe it was an unsafe home or having these other issues. They're already carrying that mental load. And then they decide to go and pay all this money to do school, right? Which is a whole thing. And then once they finish school, they now have oftentimes probably these student loans mixed with a very low salary, mixed with these secondhand traumas. It just tells me that the type of people that have signed up to do this work, they're like actual heroes.
Yeah,
These
shout
are
out to all social
actual
workers
heroes.
and mental health workers. Like shout out to everybody in this
Seriously,
field. This is so noble.
It's
incredible.
behavioral health.
Behavioral health.
Yes,
Yes,
my
behavioral
gosh.
health. Yeah.
Well, and everybody needs these services too. This isn't limited to those that don't have a home. It seems like it needs to be a shift in mindset of rewarding these career paths that could help everybody. Who doesn't need to talk to somebody? Who doesn't need a therapist or mental health?
Yeah, and I
It's
love
a
that you
shame.
brought up the idea of compassion fatigue. I think that that's such a beautiful term for people that are right consistently giving, pouring out their cup day in and day out for the people around them. I imagine it is really difficult to not get jaded, to not feel like I have nothing left to give.
Ooh, yes. You know, for the individuals, well, whether they're professionals or interns, you know, and I'm sure other people have different opinions. Certainly, they need to put themselves first so that they can show up again tomorrow. So, you know, how do we look after our own mental health? How do we not run? We don't want to run ourselves in a deficit. There will always be plenty of clients. We run wait lists. We don't always have clinicians for everybody. So, you know, I need them to put themselves first and take good care of themselves. And then we can help whoever comes through the door needing and wanting to receive services. But, you know, and when we see people suffer, we tend to extend ourselves even more. And we have to reel that back a little bit and realize that I'm a sister, I'm an aunt, I'm a partner, I'm a pet owner, I'm a daughter, I'm all of these things, and need to maintain some personal integrity around that in order to show up for people that are in pain, that are suffering, that may not present in such a way that they are well received by others. Certainly folks come through the door traumatized, overwhelmed, maybe not using the best language. And how do we receive them into care instead of saying, you can't talk to me that way. If you don't get out of here, we're going to trespass you, all that other stuff. And certainly there's folks that and agencies where that may be a little more tolerated depending on their niche population. But by and large, and I'm just going to pick on Kaiser for a minute, you walk into Kaiser with that presentation and certainly you're going to be escorted out. And we see that in our emergency departments also. They've got a sign on the wall. My primary care has it. You are not going to use disrespectful language here. You're not going to be threatening. We see that posted now when you walk in the building. And there are individuals that are not able to present that way. They're not able to get themselves together that way. It's such a traumatic experience out there that I need some help, and this is the only way I know to ask for it, and I need somebody to attend to me right now. And as community mental health, how do we find a way to serve people with this type of presentation? Because they are in need. Are we able to meet them where they are at? Because clearly where they are right now is distressed, overwhelmed, traumatized, not enough resources. And when we talk about people meeting people where they're at, individuals have certain capacities for certain kinds of things. And I think as professionals, it's important to recognize that.
That's so
I don't know that
interesting.
I could work in a situation where there's blood. I could
Yeah.
not meet those clients where they're at. And I just, as a professional, I need to know that this is the population that I can't meet them where they're at. I need to go over here and do these things where I am able to tolerate a little more of a presentation that may not be appropriate in other settings.
It's interesting. We've come back a few times to rules. Right? We've come back quite a bit to like the idea that there are these rules. There's certain people that just can't, for whatever reason, meet those requirements, whether they're in shelters, whether they're in encampments, whether they're in these other facilities that are provided. And the idea that like do we lower the expectations so that more people can have access to this? Or do we keep the bar where it's at because the requirements are here for the safety of the workers and for what the workers believe they're entitled to?
Mm-hmm.
Um, it's just such an interesting conversation about boundaries and about standards and about, as you said, meeting people where they are and what is effective.
Well,
Yeah.
and food and health, those should not be, you shouldn't need to be a perfect human being to be entitled to those things. It's yeah, nobody wants to be talked to a certain way, but does that mean that person doesn't deserve food or doesn't deserve health treatment? It's seems pretty cut and dry.
But then they have to go into an establishment where those things are served. And that
Hmm.
means that there has to be
That's the
workers
problem.
there.
All right.
So And it's not lost on us, Letha, the intersection that you are in of being not only a behavioral health specialist worker, and taking on the compassion fatigue and taking on the things that come with that. You're also running a household yourself, and then you're also a teacher. And you're all of these things that we feel are, I don't think they're undervalued in society. I would say that they're like, we very much value those things, but they're certainly undercompensated. And just kudos to you, and thank you for everything that you do, and for being a role model for the behavioral health specialists and social workers that are coming into their own and trying to navigate the system, and that extra strength that it takes for you to be a pillar of support for them, and at the same time supporting your clients and the people that you're seeing that need these services. You're amazing, and just thank you for
that.
Thank you for talking to us. It's been
I just want to add that I couldn't do it without a team of people that does this work and is passionate about it, about the supervisors that I have in my life, and I have several that are such great leaders and have supported me throughout the years, and also my colleagues as educators that put a lot of time and effort into trying to bring new without these people, I'm just one person, but this is the team of people that is helping to shape who comes into the field and how we deliver these services, and in looking after very vulnerable people. So I owe it to them.
Shout out to them too. It takes a village.
I wonder, do you have any advice for people who are looking to get into social work, or who feel like this is a direction they feel called to move into?
Ooh, nice. Everybody is so unique. I think that with anything, I think it's important to look at your own values and identity, what brings you joy, what you find meaningful. And I guess this would be, something that I would promote is, and I hated hearing this growing up, where do you see yourself 5 years, 10 years, 15 years down the line? Because when I started as a bachelor's degree student at the University of Washington in the School of Social Work, I did not realize that when I graduated, I would make less money than I was in food service, but that I would have other opportunities as my career progressed. I guess those are the things, and just be prepared to figure out what it is that you want to do.
That's great advice. And as we said, if you do decide to go this route, you are a GD hero, and we need more of you. It seems like a very fulfilling way to spend your life and your energy.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, I have no regrets. This is wonderful. I think that, there's sacrifice involved with this. I don't know since I graduated from University of Washington that I've ever had just one job. Someday I would like to retire. And so that's part of the, sacrifice. It's also part of the, what has augmented my personal satisfaction as far as a career is I guess it would be wonderful to have just one job and and it'd just be 40 hours a week. And I enjoy so much more than that by contributing in other areas that it is very fulfilling. But yeah, I don't know a whole lot of people that only work one job in this field.
Letha, thank you so much for your time today. You gave us so many things to think about, and we just really appreciate you and the work that you do and your beautiful bright light that you shine.
Thank you. Thank you so much for listening and asking these really important questions. It was a pleasure to spend time with you today.
Thank you.
Thank you, Letha.
Have a great weekend.
I will. You too.
Bye.
Bye.
All right, let's unpack that.
Wow, Letha was very interesting. I think of a lot of the interviews we've done so far, it's definitely shining a light on the type of homelessness that I feel is more stereotyped that people see on the street and are a little bit more, maybe not fearful of, but a little bit more, maybe less empathetic of, you know? Or
Yeah,
yeah,
I
it was
think
kind of the raw side of
you bet. I think
homelessness
that the
with it.
general population is not talking with people on the level that she is. She's got tons of stories from all of these different backgrounds, and so when people make sweeping assumptions about how to treat homeless and things like that, I feel like it's helpful to have people like Letha kind of give some perspective of what individuals are going through.
Yeah, yeah, and just like acknowledging to the other side of it, like what social workers, the hoops that they have to jump through to really be able to have a career in this field, and the, as we said, like the almost the sacrifices that they have to make, you know, and then it makes me think about just like the type of person that you have to be to do this work. Like that's just
Mhm.
amazing. I can't
Yeah,
believe
and
there's I can't believe there's not more resources like for these types of
yeah, I
Oh,
was going to say it's also like a type of, it's also a field where not only are you facing all the challenges that she outlined in the interview, but a lot of times these organizations and these services are fighting for their own budget. So
Mm.
could you imagine like going to work and then like every quarter or every 6 months or every year, because I'm sure it's different for different
mhm.
places, but having to ask and like write grants and like do all of this work or like have a team of people doing this work to like make sure that you guys can be funded for the next year. Like
Oh
none of us
yeah.
experience that. We just
Oh
know the
yeah.
next year we're going to have our job,
They're
you know?
battling against other people that are doing equally valuable work for the budget.
Yeah,
It,
they're
it kills
facing.
me that like when they are spending all of their mental energy helping other people, and they have to pay for their own separate therapy and working through stuff. It's in a already underfunded department to be able to or to have to pay for that in addition to that. That
Yeah.
Yeah, and I
seems like
Yeah.
wonder,
something's broken.
we've talked to people in different fields of this, of how they're helping this issue. And like, there's housing and there's mental illness and there's substance abuse and there's all these other things.
Immigration. Yeah.
Yeah. And I wonder if like having to quote unquote fight for your budget, if it enforces this mindset of like what I'm doing is the most important piece, or it's like
Mm,
the piece that needs the most attention because you need that, right? Like your
right.
department, the people you care about, the causes that you're working in. And so I wonder if it almost like puts a little bit of a blinder on being able to acknowledge that the other industries that are working to solve this problem might have equal value, just because you have to fight for it.
Yeah, I'd agree. And it shouldn't be that way.
Yeah.
It's a shame that there's not more money in something that's so important to everybody. This
Yeah.
affects
But
everyone.
it's just frustrating a little bit to me because there are so many companies that exist that just they produce products that are just consumed, and are is the government reevaluating them every year and saying, hey, you know what, you've put a little too much toxic waste this year, or you know what, you've violated a little too many labor rights this year, or something like, I mean, maybe in that circumstance, but this just to always have to like justify your company existing or
Uh,
your job existing.
Yeah.
Seems like the one area where you shouldn't need to. Well, no, I won't go that far.
Maybe not the
But
one area, but
Well,
one
that
of
this shouldn't
them.
be scrutinized on the same level of some of these other ones, you know?
sure, yeah, yeah, it's wild. I
Yeah.
do want to go into social work, as you guys know. So I appreciated your question, Karsi,
Yeah.
on the advice that she gave. And lucky for me, I have such a supportive family and friends system. And
Mm.
I really do think that probably is, I mean, as she said too, leaning into our communities is probably a very helpful tool to help people get through the challenges of that kind of work.
Yeah. So people who have been through things, who have their own experiences, for instance, let's just say like I came from a certain type of home and now I want to work for CPS. I want to get my social work and I want to work for CPS so that I can help prevent maybe what happened to me. And this is not my example. This is just a hypothetical, but like the idea that people who have been through stuff can use those experiences, can use that trauma and channel it into a way that is so effective to reach other people. Like when we talk about drug use, if you've been a drug addict and you've been able to get out of that, instead of saying, this thing defines me and I'm always going to spend my life trying to prove I'm not that,
Mhm.
taking that and say, I can use that to give back to the community and to do some outreach to help people who are currently suffering with that, because I am a testament to the fact that you can get out of it.
Well, it
Yeah.
sounds like the peer route is a great option.
Hmm.
A good friend of mine did that where and she said that I think she was the only one for a mental health facility to do this, but to be able to talk on a peer level to someone is just far more valuable. And that's also a good way to see if you can see yourself doing that long term. But what she did was go through the paperwork process on different things and direct them on where to get resources. And they're a little more equipped to deal with some of the outbursts that come through people that are working through some of the issues that they are. So it seems like that's a really good place to start to know if you're ready to transition to make it a full-fledged career.
I just can't give them enough of a shout out and appreciation. I mean, especially if you do recover and you make it out of that world and that scene, you'd think you would just want to like run for the hills. Like, I'm never looking back. I don't want to be in that world. Like, I'm above it now. I'm beyond it or whatever. Yeah. And so to then go and face all of those challenges again, but from through a different lens and on the helping side of it, it's just so noble.
Yeah,
Just
and
love those
no
people.
no wonder you would need a therapist. Like that should be at
Yeah.
the very like if what are we doing if we're not even providing that, long term, not just 6 or 8 appointments, but like long term to these people. Another thing that we talked about that I thought was really, really interesting was the idea of wet housing and what that is and what that means. And when she was talking, I was thinking about, I wonder if people who are in wet housing, if they're almost like discouraged in a way from getting clean, because like if I'm a heroin addict, right, and I'm living in a wet housing, I've qualified for that. That's my reality. It's going to be so much harder, I imagine, to get clean from that, knowing my
Hmm.
neighbors have access to these things. And I'm seeing people as I walk down the hallways, maybe using or maybe, under the influence of these things. It's an interesting thing to think about.
I guess I can see it from a standpoint that she gave the example of if you're going to have extreme withdrawals and get your beer or two. When it starts going into hard drugs, then I can't say that I agree with wet housing.
Hmm.
But I do want to learn more about it, and I certainly don't have the full perspective of it. So it's interesting to hear how different places do it.
It seems to me if you were trying to provide shelter and cover all of the bases, there are going to be people who have a high potential or they're very capable of recovering, maybe, from drugs
Hmm.
with if they go through the program. It's not an overnight thing, obviously, but if they
Yeah.
take the steps and they go through it, and then there are just in the world just going to be people who just they are just going to do the drug, and
Hmm.
recovery for them to have recovery happen before stability or to have recovery happen before independence is just so maybe out of scope for them
Hmm.
that
Hmm.
if the goal is to house everybody who needs it, then there's got to be a place for people who are just addicted to
Yeah.
drugs who aren't going to put in that kind of the effort and the detox it would take to get off of it, who are just mentally unstable or maybe even suffering with like a severe mental illness and at the same time addicted to drugs. There's got to be somewhere, I mean, for them to go
Yeah.
just to make sure they have shelter and food and baths and someone checking in on them, maybe not in the middle of a city. I mean, but then again, like They made a very good point about if you're going to have these services, they need to be on a bus line, you know? So,
Sure. But I mean, the big part is who funds it. Because if you're looking at it from a standpoint of they're going to do it anyway, we just are ensuring that they're not on the street, that they have a house over their head. It's just at what point is the government responsible for, and taxpayers responsible for funding this.
right. Yeah, and if you were to say, okay, we're going to have wet housing, but we're only going to have it in like rural communities or rural areas, so that way it's not in the city and not as many people need to see it. Well, there's still going to be people seeing it because there are people who live out there, out, in rural areas.
Mm-hmm.
And also the like, there's not as much tax funding to go around in those counties. So we would pull resources from counties that are already have like a lower budget on things to put into something like that. I don't know.
Yeah, I mean the theme I felt like often was like boundaries, and rules and like requirements and expectations and who can meet those and who can't and how do we decide who meets what expectations and when and what's required and um it's just like I mean, the more we dig into these topics, the more it's clear that this is so complicated. I mean, even just like what you were just talking about with like who needs housing first, who needs recovery first, who needs, therapy first. Like it just feels like a chicken or the egg,
Mhm.
right? Like what
Uh-huh.
comes first and how do we decide?
Yeah, I think that we should have a future episode where we unpack that further. We've been talking about some good content. Some friends have sent us resources of there's El Salvador. Their prison system is they have a no tolerance, but they have different levels of prisons and reacclimation. And there are a lot of people out there that have the opinions of start in start in jail and recover, have your privileges temporarily taken away while you're recovering, and then kind of go back in. And that's completely opposite of the housing first. So I think that that'll be fun to learn more about, and we can unpack that later.
Absolutely.
It's awesome.
Thanks,
All right.
guys.
Have a great day. Thanks for listening to Unpacking Homelessness. This episode was produced and edited by us. Our theme song is by Eric Lawson. You can find more of his music at soundcloud.com/eelaws. If you or someone you know would like to contribute to our show, get in touch with us at unpackinghomelessness@gmail.com. Until next time.